Hi guys. So look, really interesting. I'm going to show you how to get into your customers' minds. Well, that's really interesting for a mathematician. So one of the things that happened was 5 or 6 years ago, when we were doing digital marketing, people would say to us, what do we do? How do we know what our customers are saying? So the same questions you're asking yourself. How do you know what your customers think and feel about your location, your operation, where they're going? So we started thinking very carefully about this, and we thought, if we can read people's minds, we'll know the answer. Sure. So what we did, we came with some technology. And so we started using this idea of big data to understand what people think. And the simple idea really was, if people talk about stuff on social media, they give a pretty good insight about what they think. And particularly where I live in China, everybody there talks about what they do. So before they eat, they take photographs of their meal. Before they go somewhere, they ask people, where should they go? What's the advice you should give me? So we thought social media is a great proxy for telling us how they authentically feel about a location. So then we had to start thinking, okay, well, social media is a great medium for expressing oneself. How do we understand it? So we came up with this thing about natural language processing. So it allows us to drill down. So what that does is it gives us a lot of information. And so for you guys in tourism, you've got to be thinking, okay, well, I've got this information, you've got this big data, and there's a very real risk of you now running away and doing stuff. So the cautionary note here is big data doesn't answer the questions, because you've got to really understand the question you're trying to ask. So big data for itself isn't the answer, but certainly it'll help you understand the direction you're going. So in a very short space of time, I'm going to talk about what big data is. So big data is essentially like it says. There's a lot of information, and you can gain that information from lots of different places. And for example, when we think about big data, we think about data like geography. We think about where people are talking online, where people live, what's the type of device that they use, what's the type of photos that they either consume or post. And that all rolls up into data, and then we start segmenting it and looking at it. And so it's pretty easy, really. So what we do is we have an article, so you might either read it as a consumer, or you might create it. And that article has phrases, and those phrases has words. So we have a machine language that goes along and starts segmenting these things up. And when it starts segmenting those things up, it then starts categorizing the language. And it starts saying, well, is that negative, or is that positive? What's the tone? So it starts looking at information from that. And we start doing some pretty interesting art. And we start mapping this stuff into these sort of spatial maps. Because what I can start to do is, over millions of conversations, I can start looking at the things that are aligned to each other. What are the groups of information that's the same? So for example, when we do analysis for Hawaii as a destination, we start looking at what are all the related topics. So for example, we know that when Chinese go to Hawaii and we start doing spatial mapping, we start understanding that they're going for shopping, they're going for golf, they're going for the experience. These are the things that we can take away from their conversations. And then we can start looking at who's actually talking about it. Is it one person that has they have a disproportionate influence over other people? Or is it these rogue sort of people just talking about random stuff? So we can understand that very clearly from the data. And it's pretty simple, really. So basically, you just take a lot of text and you cut it up into nouns, into verbs, and you start doing counts. And you just create these buckets. And that's what natural language processing is really about. The challenge, of course, in English against the Asian language is you don't know when to break the words up. So you've got to work out, oh my God, if these combinations of words mean this or they mean that. For example, in English, when you talk about finding apple, am I talking about the fruit, or am I talking about the computer machine, the machines? So you've got to find the context in which language is used. And it's quite an interesting challenge. And I can talk about that all night. But what we can do is, once we start breaking those languages up into segments and understanding the tonism and the things, you start mapping them out. And you can say, well, when I look at sentiment, so when someone talks about travel to a particular destination, you can start ranking it. And then you can start applying other factors on that ranking. Because now you can start to understand a little bit about what your customer thinks. What's that journey look like? Because if you're doing a clipboard exercise at the airport, you're not getting necessarily the most truthful or most accurate answer because they're responding to someone on the clipboard. You're also not getting a very big group. You might get 100 or 200 people in your sample size. Here, in days or hours, we can get 1 million conversations from around the world. Staggering. And people don't know we're doing it. So they're a lot more authentic in the way they describe stuff. It's staggering. And then what we can do is we can start mapping it visually. And this becomes really interesting because as a marketer, I want to know who's talking about stuff. And as a marketer, if I know who's talking about it in a positive way, then I can create communications for that group. And if I know who's talking about it in a negative way, I can create very personalized experiences for that group as well. And I can create these very geographically based, behavioral targeted campaigns. Wow. Not only that, because I know where you are, because you're using things like phones that allow me to triangulate and find out where you are, or if you're using PCs, you have something called an IP address, I can start mapping you over maps. And I can create densities. And the really cool thing is I can start using things like Google or Baidu if you're in China, and I can show you where you are on a map. And I can start plotting for brands or destinations who are the fanatics about a particular location. Where's the clusters of people that love this product? Because I can either reach out to them and create campaigns to solicit their support, or if there's a whole lot of detractors, I may want to reach out to them as well. And that becomes a very interesting thing. So I can create these really interesting maps that are geography-based, device-based, gender-based, age-based, socioeconomic-based. That tells me a lot of stuff about my consumers, my travelers. And then I can start breaking it down into personas, archetypes. What are the type of people who are thinking about going to Thailand next month? What's that archetype look like? That's a pretty interesting thing to be able to do. Because if I understand the archetype, I understand the message that's going to resonate with that person. I understand when that person is going to read and consume information, and when they're more likely to engage. Because word of mouth is the second biggest influencer on perception of change than your family and friends. Isn't that remarkable? So these archetypes are really super important. So a couple of parting thoughts in a very short time. I'm hoping to get you thinking about big data and how you can use it. So this allows you to predict new products because I can see trends. I can understand what people are thinking about now in order to think about where they want to go in their travel. So I can do some predictive analysis to say, wow, in the next 2 months, there's going to be an influx into Phuket because I can see the conversations talking about it. And if that's the case, I can start to think about new products either in this seasonal period or in the next one. I predict that it's going to really change the way the travel industry works. Because right now, the travel industry fly blind. A lot of it's not led by real-time analysis. A lot of it's led by historical reports that are a year old or further back. It's crazy. Why wouldn't you want to know what people are thinking right now? Why would you want to think about what they're thinking about next month? Because I've got the data to be able to predict what they're thinking about next month. Or I've got the data to tell me what the chances are of them doing something next month. And we can start predicting products. We can start predicting the way that we will create a better experience for when our travelers arrive. And the ideas for big data are expanding everywhere. There's not one area in the tourism sector that has not been impacted by this type of research. And I expect, one day we'll have Google glasses that allow us to do 3D overlays to be able to sense stuff as people come through the door. And that's a crazy mathematician now. So I want to leave that with a parting thought. If you want to get hold of me, you've got my details up here. Thank you very much.